who have served their community locally, first, whether it be on a board, commission, school board, city council, etc., really making a reputation by doing the hard and glamorous work of listening to people and making municipal policy, and then deciding to run for higher office. Julia Brownley was on our school board here for 8 years?
12.
12, okay, 12 years. It just went by so fast because it was so good. I had the privilege when Julia was president of the school board to be the mayor and the council, and here in Santa Monica, the school district, the college, and the city council try and work together intimately on common goals and needs, and it was a pleasure working with her then. Julia has moved into the Assembly and is the chair of the Assembly Committee on Education, and there's also an informal get-together of Assembly members that are tracking the Constitutional Convention process. She's part of that. I think probably the most important thing, however, to realize about Julia is when we're here and we're talking about why the structure doesn't work, Julia is the kind of person that we want to send to Sacramento. And when people like her go there,
Thank you.
and then it doesn't work, she's proof of why we need structural change. Julia Brownley.
Thank you very much, Mike. That was very nice. Very, very nice. Thank you. So let me just say up front that California's governance structure is broken, and we need to fix it. I think there's never been a more profound moment in California's history where there's been more consensus around this thirst, this quest for reform. And the question is, at least for me, is how do we best seize the moment, gain the momentum, ensure success, and restore California to the beacon of opportunity it once was, and to coin a phrase in another group who's worked very hard around reform, how do we move California forward? I went to Sacramento wanting to return our schools and higher education systems back to its greatness. Education is the single most important human capital investment our state needs to make to ensure prosperity for California and to sustain our competitive edge in a highly competitive global marketplace. I wanted to go to Sacramento to provide affordable, accessible health care for all Californians, and especially for our children, and to clean up and protect our environment, and to leverage and transform California as the technological leader of a new green economy, and to promote social and economic justice for all, and last but not least, to make our government more transparent and work more effectively for all of us. So here I am, 2.5 years into my legislative tenure, and with term limits, I'm at the pinnacle of my legislative career and the worst economic crisis in our country's history, with only one hope in mind, and that is to fundamentally change how we do business in California, to unleash the gridlock so the hopes and dreams for a better California can simply be possible. I thought I understood Sacramento before I got there, but I really didn't understand the severity, the gridlock that paralyzes Sacramento, and I think certainly as the economy worsens, the partisan divide seems to get wider and wider. There's term limits, it's a very short-term time in Sacramento, and of course the 2/3 requirement for budgets and revenues. We've said it over and over and over and over again, but it does create, in my belief, the tyranny of the minority. And being locked in the assembly chambers for budget negotiations all-nighters, it's not pretty. It's pretty ugly. And from my lens, it's very frustrating that the minority party seemingly gets more than 50% of the bargain or the compromise, and the majority party is the party that seems to be responsible and produces the votes, and then the minority party doesn't put up any votes or puts up just enough votes, and they get to go home and say, we haven't made any cuts, or we wouldn't make those cuts that the legislature made. So that's always very frustrating. Karen Bass, our speaker, as soon as she became speaker, she called for tax reform in the state of California and put together a bipartisan commission charged with recommending bipartisan solutions. But it looks like even this commission is facing political gridlock and may ultimately present majority and minority recommendations without really addressing some of the holy grail issues around tax reform. California is in this budget mess primarily right now because of a historically unprecedented economic collapse. But when the economy took a nosedive, California was facing the perfect storm because the structural deficit that persists in our budget that we have not been able to fix because over the last decades because of the two-thirds requirement to govern will only persist. And as soon as the economy recovers, that structural deficit will be there, and we're not going to be able to fix it without some kind of reform. So what are the next steps? What does the legislature do? Well, certainly from my perspective, and I think from many of my colleagues, we have a sense of urgency. We want reform now. We understand we also need to look ahead, and we need to really get it right in this next election in 2010. The 2010 ballot with initiatives and so forth are growing exponentially each day. And there are going to be ones out there that we're going to want to support, and there are going to be ones out there that we are going to want to defeat. Certainly the two ballot initiatives for the Constitutional Convention. There's going to be the governor's race. Well, from my vantage point, keeping the Democratic majority, maybe from this group I should say keeping the progressive majority. Labor and John Burton are going to put the two-thirds initiative on the ballot. Lenny Goldberg and the California Tax Reform Association has a new initiative to close corporate loopholes and tax relief. These are all important issues. And then there are issues that we might want to defeat. Some may support a part-time legislature. Some might not. But I would certainly say if we're going to have a part-time legislature, then we should certainly include a part-time governor and certainly a part-time third house and lobbyists. And the and the anti-tax groups are working more on spending limits and pension reform, and God knows what else is going to be on the ballot. But the point is we're going to have a lot on the ballot in 2010. And how do we best wrestle with that and put our hands around that and be strategic about that so that we are indeed successful in 2010? So Mike asked me to talk a little bit about the perspective from inside the legislature on the Constitutional Convention. And so I'm going to make a few comments, and I hope it can be made without prejudice, because I'm not necessarily expressing my opinion, nor the collective legislative opinion, because I don't think any of us have one. But I think these are some of the things that we have sat down and talked about in the legislature, for better or for worse. One, there's a concern about timing. The initiatives will be on the ballot in 2010, get going in 2011, hopefully to have something in 2012 to put on the ballot. But quite frankly, there's not a guarantee that that will happen. And so there's a concern because of the sense, I believe, of urgency. I've also heard about the legality of having two initiatives on the ballot at the same time. Can you put an initiative forward that says that the people can call a Constitution Convention and call one at the same time. That's been raised. The issue, the Pandora box issue, is everything going to be on the table, and the fear around that? I certainly believe, I think at this point, that when the initiative is written, that they will be very clear and specific about framing what the Constitutional Convention will be about, and we won't have that concern. And of course, the selection of delegates, which is an ongoing conversation in the legislature about how that's going to happen. We're watching and learning just like everybody else is watching and learning. And of course, the big advantage to all of this, from my perspective, is citizen participation and the opportunity to put multiple subjects, multiple issues on one ballot. Right now, we only have the single subject rule, and the Constitutional Convention allows you to put more issues on one ballot. Again, without prejudice, I think some of the legislative discussion has been about a revision commission. A revision commission happened in 1994. It can happen in two ways, either through a concurrent resolution where you don't need the governor's signature, or through statute, where of course you would need the governor's signature. But both of those can be passed by a majority vote in the legislature. Now, and again, without prejudice, the revision commission also has the great advantage, as the Constitutional Convention has, of the citizen participation, and it also has the advantage of putting more subject areas into one initiative. In 1994, it kind of worked, it sort of worked. There were a few things that came out of it. People talk about it. There was the good news, bad news story. The good news was in 1994 when the aerospace industry sort of plummeted and our economy tanked. They say that not as many revisions came out or recommendations came out of that because the economy turned around and the concern wasn't there. The bad news is, I think in our case now, is the economy's not going to turn around really quickly. So this sense of urgency, I think, is not going to go away. And some of my research, too, I understand that Dr. Sang from Santa Monica College actually participated in that 1994 revision commission. But anyway, the legislature has an ACR, this concurrent resolution, sitting in Assembly Judiciary Committee as we speak, and it's ready if the legislature decides to move forward with that kind of action. I'm not saying they are. I think our first and foremost objective right now is to balance the budget, but as soon as we get through that, we really want to start moving forward with a reform package. And then, of course, all of the legislators, including myself, are carrying various bills and resolutions around reform, and there are many, like two-year budgeting processes, voter threshold changes for parcel taxes, limits on the initiative process, reform on signature gathering, requiring a funding source if you're going to have a ballot initiative to require a funding source, and transparency and better accountability bills. And I have one. I have AB 8, which is about comprehensively trying to reform the school finance system. And I mean comprehensively trying to reform it. As you talked about public finance reform, school finance reform, a very large part of California's budget is complicated, complex, irrational, and for sure, nobody understands it. There's a small cottage industry in Sacramento who do. And so I say, let's step back. Let's take this old convoluted finance system that makes no sense and no one can understand and recreate one that is simple to understand, that follows the needs of kids, And with simplicity, you're going to gain better transparency and better accountability, and certainly a system that everyone can understand and everyone can follow the money and see how the money is dispersed from Sacramento to school districts and school districts to school. And I think that that will better leverage better governance at the local level and in Sacramento. So maybe the early thinking of the legislature, I thought a lot about this, about how I could describe it in a very brief way. Maybe it's sort of a trifecta strategy in some sense, with a short term and a mid-term and sort of a longer term perspective. Certainly on the short-term strategy, in the sense of urgency that I'm speaking of, I think there's some polling that indicates that maybe reducing the voter threshold to raise local taxes for cities, for counties, for school districts, polling looks good on that. At this particular point, California is falling off the cliff, and I feel like we need to have a lifeline thrown out to schools and counties and cities. And so maybe that's something that we can be done sooner versus later. Majority vote budgets, not majority vote revenue enhancements and decisions, but majority vote budgets. Even some Republicans at this particular point in time are saying they would support a concept of majority vote budgets. And then a midterm solution, if the legislature so chooses, looking at a revision commission. And a revision commission is a legislative advisory council with lots of people participating in that process. And then certainly on the longer term scale, the Constitutional Convention that can act as a backdrop to all of this. But there is no question the legislature feels a sense of urgency, a need to really be strategic, a need to seize the moment, and how are we going to get this right in 2010? So those are my comments for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.